Hello, everybody, and welcome to the annual edition of the Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendan. And how are we doing here on Leafs Burial Day?
Yeah, good. Look, we all saw it coming for some time. It's brutal. Every year, it's like eventually it kind of has to end. This streak has to end. Like it's not going
No,
to
it
be for
doesn't.
all time, but it feels like it right now.
We're gonna get into it. Trust me. There's a lot of deep diving to be done on this. As let's face it, everybody on the internet is doing. So why not?
Yeah, I mean, look, the knives have been out for a while now. Honestly, the moment that like Florida won a game in this series, the knives were out for the Leafs. That's like, oh, they're gonna choke it. Oh, they're gonna, like people have known that this day was coming for a week. It's shocking.
Unreal. It was unreal, and the way we get there, and we will go into it in great depth. But obviously, we're in episode 221. I didn't bother to do my trivia today because I was going to, but there's far too much other fun stuff to talk about. And look, we're going to lead off today, obviously, with obviously we go back to number 21. And who better to discuss than Leafs legend Bobby Bourne, who of course was playing for the Leafs the last time they won a cup. So, and I figured that's the stat for the day is let's find the Leafs that played for the Leafs the last time they won a cup.
Oh, boy.
That's Bobby Bourne is pretty much there because Terry Clancy was after they didn't win a cup with Terry Clancy. It was basically Bobby Bourne.
Yeah, Boris Selming is in this list, but like after the last cup.
No cup. As Steve Dangle put it on his most watched video of the year, as always. And I actually don't know if anyone's watched the Dangle video this already, but he opens it by playing clips from the last 5, and he just opens it with the clips from every one of this about this team won't learn, this team does this stupidly, and it's the same clip every year, and he just goes, they don't learn. But he pointed out in that video that when they were talking about statues and legends, and he's like, there are statues out the front to people that never sniffed a second round, that never sniffed the playoffs because they tried, which is more than we can say for you. So, like Bobby Bourne,
Boris Helming, legend of the franchise, was with the Leafs for 16 years, just from that 74 to 89 period where there was no cup.
But you've got to remember, and we've done this, he was playing in absolute peak Ballard.
Oh, yeah,
And that's the problem. Paul Boreas Helming, he was playing in peak Ballard. And if you've not listened or watched our episode on the Harold Ballard documentary, I highly recommend going back and looking at it because that documentary is insane. And if you want to know why the Leafs are broken, that's a really good starting point. So if you are brand new, and obviously within the Australian NHL fans page, we've got some people who are fairly new to hockey. If you are new and want to know why this franchise is a broken franchise, highly recommend you go and watch the Harold Ballard story. It is insanity for everyone who's never seen it before, and you will not believe that this man did the things that he did, like, for example, living in Maple Leaf Gardens, for example. Going down to the concession stand for his evening meal, things like that. Because why not? Why don't you do that? Anyway, let's get into some actual hockey stuff before we get into burying the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is coming. The front office changes. Now, there's some interesting ones. Rick Tocchet had a conversation with Vancouver and went, you know what? I think I want to go home, and went back to the Flyers. So Tocchet is named the new head coach of the Flyers.
It feels like, Tocchet is kind of like the light version of what they've had. Like,
what was really interesting was that Tocchet at his press conference was spending a lot of time talking about things that were very non-Tortorella. And I think that might be, for me, my nickname for Rick Tocchet is non-Tortorella. Not John Tortorella, but non-Tortorella. Because he just spent all the time talking about encouraging Matvei Michkov and working with growth and development and mentoring, and this needs to be fun. And you're like, you've not heard these words in Philadelphia. These are foreign concepts to you. What do you think it says, though, about Vancouver? And we'll talk about what Vancouver did in a minute. That they were umming and ahhing a little bit, that Tocchet kind of made the decision for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's never a good sign when you're coming into a contract extension and they're not sure. Like that's it should be probably a slam dunk if like there is an extension done in advance in the NHL. It's probably a good sign that there is kind of some animosity or some bad blood, or they're considering whether or not that's the best option. That rarely do we hear about them kind of going down to the line with a coach, their contract expiring and then them actually getting extended.
I thought it was weird because the talk coming out of Vancouver was that Vancouver had kind of decided they wanted Tocchet back, but then Tocchet by that point had decided that he was kind of not really keen on coming back. And I find it interesting that you look at the Flyers and you look at the Canucks and you decide that you think the Flyers are the better choice. I mean, Michkov is fantastic, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they are a lot further behind in the build.
I'm curious about what he knows about the, Vancouver's upcoming moves and so forth. Obviously, they've got some question marks around the future of Elias Pettersson and all that kind of stuff. They've just recently shipped out JT Miller. Like, that could be a team going into a retool on its own. I'm curious whether or not that factored into it, or it was just a matter of I just want to be closer to home.
I think home probably played a part of it, but if you believe in that Vancouver core, you're not walking out on it where you think there might be a chance that it's suddenly going to progress. It's also, look, it's not a bad time to go to the Flyers, though, given we've talked about the state of the Metro. And the Metro is weak. It's kind of the right time. Like, I think if you're going to do it, you've just got Matvei Michkov. John Tortorella hasn't beaten the life out of him yet.
It's very soft there for sure. Like, if they can make some decent improvements, there's a lot of teams that they could surpass.
Meanwhile, if you are a fan of the Vancouver Canucks took a very long look around the league and went, "Oh, we've got one here." And
quickly, I will just say, Tocchet, obviously, as much as he did play for like the Flyers and the Penguins and spent time in the Penguins organization, he is from Ontario. So
he's from Ontario. But
in my head, I thought that he was from like that kind of.
No, but he talks about Philadelphia like home, and he's
I think he spent so much time, professional time. Yeah, obviously,
he always sort of has. But Vancouver looked around and went, "Oh, we've got one here," and just kind of moved Adam Foote into the coaching role. They believe that this seems to, a lot of people have reported this was kind of like the way they did the coaching search was went, hey, Elias, who you want? You want Adam? We can hire Adam.
I mean, it's obviously a recognizable name. There's some element of that, I think, where they're like, oh, hey, we're going to bring in this guy that everyone kind of knows of. And I don't know. I'm not sure about, whether or not that's going to be a big improvement for them, but it feels to me more like a PR thing than anything else.
Vancouver are weird, and obviously we're talking to a group of people, obviously in the Australian NHL fans page, where there's a lot of Vancouver Canucks fans. Vancouver, they've not quite. I don't think Vancouver handled vague success very well, and they're definitely not handling the bit on the cusp, where you could be really good or you could fall off the cliff. And it feels like they're pushing it off the cliff themselves. And like we can't accidentally fail if we deliberately do it. And so they're just kind of deliberately trying to push it off the cliff at this point in time. I don't understand. I've never seen a franchise that seems so determined with their moves to like destroy themselves. And not in a we're going to rebuild it way. They just, what's the plan? Like, this is my question. What is the plan in Vancouver? Are they pulling it apart to dismantle it, or are they pulling it apart because they're bored? Does it feel like they're bored?
I think that they really believed that it had all kind of come together. You know, they're like, oh, we've got this franchise center, we've got this franchise defenseman now. Our goaltending is all locked up. It could seem like there was a certain point in time in like the last couple of years where it seemed like, all right, Vancouver's got everything in place that they need to now, so long as they stop their like historical habits of just adding a bunch of like mid-range forwards for way too much money, then they should be able to build around this roster and actually be competitive. And it just kind of didn't all come together. Part of that is like injuries, part of that is obviously the goaltending kind of situation didn't end up as stable as they kind of expected it to be. But I don't know. I think they just kind of ran out of time. Like they basically have been on that runway for like 2 to 3 years where they're like ready to take off, ready to take off, ready to take off. And there was this always like, oh, we got to pull over and fix this. We've got to pull over and fix this. We've got to deal with this JT Miller situation. We've got to deal with the fact that our starting goaltenders, maybe never going to be the same again. And it just kind of finally got to the point where they just ran out of runway. And that's kind of the end of Pedersen's contract.
It felt. I don't think I've seen a team deal with a goalie injury worse. Thatcher Demko got injured, and the entire organization fell in a heap.
It just fell apart. Yeah, it just totally fell over.
It's literally just that. It's literally Thatcher Demko fell apart, and the next thing you know, it's Pedersen and Miller hate each other. Who is Bo Horvat and what's he going to be and where does he fit into things? And, Brock Besser and all the stuff that happened with Besser. And it just, Quinn Hughes is just standing there going, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm like, arguably, I'm in the argument for the best defenseman in the league, this year and last year and maybe he could win it this year. And, it's not enough. I mean, obviously, Pedersen had some struggles this year that that didn't help. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm still questionable about their depth. I'm still a little unsure.
They're not a deep roster. They made that successful run, and we talked about it. But they made that successful run because Thatcher Demko was amazing at that point in time. Yeah. And that was largely the thing that carried them through as far as they got. And I'm wondering at what point an organization decides to test the resolve on Quinn Hughes. Like, if you are really determined that you're going to blow this up, all right, what do you want? And I'm wondering, I don't think they'll ever take anything for him, but it's also Vancouver. Yeah. And I don't think you can rule out that Vancouver might have a conversation with you about Quinn Hughes.
I think the problem is that Vancouver will like depreciate their own assets to the point where eventually when they do trade them, they don't get value for them. Like, you probably could have traded JT Miller like, 2 years ago for a lot more.
How long have the Rangers been trying to trade for him?
Yeah, they could have traded Elias Pettersson a year ago, and now he's coming off this bad year. He's probably still very valuable to a lot of teams, but would he have been more valuable a year ago? Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you were guaranteed, like, you're deciding that, like, we're going to pull this all apart because it's not working, they're going to kind of miss the boat on it again and eventually just end up with a bucket of nothing.
And that's the issue. As I said, if I was a team that thought that they were a defensive piece away, I would make the phone call and I would ask the question. I don't think they'll answer you with a yes, but it's Vancouver.
Yeah.
You never quite know at what point they're stupidly going to say yes to something. And, we talk about it all the time. How do good teams get better? You pick up the phone and you ring the general manager. It seems a little bit dumb.
Yeah.
Vancouver, it doesn't matter who's in that building. They always seem to be a little bit dumb at the moment.
I will say, if they're going to trade Pedersen, they really need to get something good back at forward, because if Besser doesn't get extended, and even then, like, obviously, arguably, Besser hasn't quite lived up to, what they expected of him either, and they move Pedersen, suddenly, like, the best forward on Vancouver is what, like, Jake DeBrusk?
Yeah, that's not
But
good.
it's real fucking shallow after that. With Miller gone, with Pedersen potentially in trade talks, and Besser maybe won't resign now that he's a pending UFA. There's nothing really else there in the forward.
San Jose works out. San Jose works out that the defenseman they want is going to go at number 1 and makes a phone call and goes, "Would you like a center at number 2?"
Mm.
We've got number 2. Do you want number 2? You can have number 2. We'll have a defenseman. Anyway, that's not going to happen, but I just have to throw it out there because I need to be really good. Anyway, moving on. Teams. Speaking of teams that would like to be very good very fast, the Anaheim Ducks have hired Joel Quenneville as their new head coach because somebody had to do it. And you also had to find somebody who had a connection to Joel Quenneville. Cue his former teammate, Pat Verbeek, who could not resist it.
They can't help it. Like, the NHL teams have been handing around this like Russian roulette revolver for like the last couple of years, just spinning it and clicking it against their head to see who is going to be the one that brings.
He's been interviewed more than once. Everyone knows he's been interviewed more than once, and most of the teams have been smart enough to not do it. And I know there are going to be some people out there who are going to say, "Oh, but he learned his lesson and he's talked about remorse and stuff like that." There's some of the statements that he's made don't mesh with the evidence that's been presented. For example, he talked about, when I heard and found out about what had happened, I felt sick. Meanwhile, cut to transcripts from the time where he openly talked about burying the story because they were in the middle of the playoff run. So he knew about this and buried it very publicly, very privately within the organization because they were in the middle of the cup run.
I do believe that he has certainly gone through like a lot of programs, and so since to try and
I would like him to.
He's ticked every box that people would theoretically ask him to tick off. At the same time, I don't know. I just don't feel great about it. I wouldn't feel great about it if it was my team hiring him.
I think I'd feel better about it if he came out and just said, "Look, I made a bunch of mistakes in the pursuit of greatness. I got blinded by that. This is something I've had to go and learn about. I've had to go and think about what the hell happened and what the hell I did. And I've had to level with my role in it." And I think if he'd done that, you'd at least feel better about the idea that he may have set out the programs that he's gone through. All of those things have clicked in his head. He understands what he didn't do. And now he's ready to move forward. And you could at least then go, there's progress. Whereas I think the whole, when I heard about what happened to Kyle Beach, I felt terrible. Like you didn't have an understanding.
You weren't aware of it.
In the organization. Now, this is obviously, the second part of that organization that has now found work again. One of which is still in the running to win a fucking Stanley Cup.
Yeah. Look, for me, like, obviously, the people can change. People deserve a chance to become better and fix their past mistakes, all that kind of stuff. I'm certainly not saying that he shouldn't ever work again. I'm just saying that there are so few, like, there are 32 head like coach jobs in the league. I don't know for sure that there isn't another option out there. Like, they're so used to just recycling the same handful of guys that there is this automatic bump that he gets from being, part of previous NHL teams. I just don't know that the difference between him and anyone else available as like an NHL level head coach is that big that you go, we have to hire him. We have to get him, back behind an NHL bench. I don't know. I'm not convinced that he's, far and away the best guy for the job, that we have to brush over all of that and go, we had to bring him back.
To bring it back for people who are going to go, just talk about the hockey. Okay, I'll talk about the hockey. This is by far and away the worst team that Joel Quenneville's ever coached.
Yeah.
On paper, they are the worst team. Now, Pat Verbeek's like, we're going to be active. We're going to go get people. So look out for Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner's going to end up in somewhere like Chicago. We know this. But I look at this as a hockey move. I feel like it's Anaheim. They're way over their skis. They think that they are a head coach and a couple of moves away. And like Anaheim were not that far away from being worse than the Sharks. And the Sharks were actively trying to suck. And this is the other point. Anaheim haven't been actively trying to suck. That was a couple of years ago. Anaheim for the last couple of years are like, no, we're going to be much better now. And they've still sucked, right? This is not trying to suck, regardless of what you might get told. This is a team that was like, we've done our bit of being crap. We're on our path now. We're going to be brilliant. We're going to be amazing. And the Sharks, who were trying to tank, nearly caught them. So I look at this and I'm like, I don't know if Joel Quenneville makes that much of a difference. I don't think as well that players are necessarily going to run to play for Quenneville as much as somebody go, oh yeah, they definitely will because the reputation. And I don't think they will. I think a lot of the younger players now obviously respect what Quenneville has won. But I think they're looking for coaches that suit what they want to do on the ice, and that's not necessarily going to be Quenneville. I also think that this is probably Pat Verbeek's one move, and that if Anaheim suck again this year, I think that Pat Verbeek might find himself out of the job. So, because like...
Yeah, at some point in time, they have to work it out. At some point in time, they have to be competitive, and it hasn't been for a long time.
No, they've not been good. Speaking of not being good, the LA Kings have gone with the ultimate retread, and they've gone out there and they've decided that the new, young, fresh-faced general manager of this organization is Ken Holland. Because they saw the amazing job that he did in Edmonton by Connor existing. And so obviously LA have Connor and that'll be fine. No, wait, they don't.
And things have gone so great in Detroit since his
I'm being told they don't have Connor McDavid. What about Leon? No, Leon Draisaitl either. Well, Ken Holland screwed. This is not the move.
Like, I don't really get it.
This is a team that, obviously every year decides to bump into Edmonton and can't work out how to beat them. But this is a team that should be looking for something that's forward and progressive in the future. Ken Holland?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of got through their retool, their rebuild with, relatively progressive thinking, with, drafting a lot of really, high caliber prospects and so forth, and kind of building out that system again. Meanwhile, with like Kopitar still on the roster, I just don't, I don't know why you look at like his resume and kind of go, yeah, we need him to come in and sign us to just an applicator to get us through.
Look, he's destroyed 2 cup contenders, one of which was winning cups, and he destroyed them in the quest to keep them in playoffs rather than pull it down and go again.
Yeah.
And then literally, if you want to know why the Oilers stagnated, it's Ken Holland. Ken Holland
wasted several years.
And this is the thing. And, I have thoughts on Stan Bowman, but one of the things I will say is that Stan Bowman is doing a really, 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 really complex job at the moment of undoing Ken Holland's work. So, why would you in LA turn around and go, that's our guy?
Yeah, Edmonton have some kind of depth for the first time in the entirety of Connor McDavid's tenure, because of the work that they're trying to undo, getting rid of all of those previous issues and filling it out with decent depth players.
I look forward to Ken Holland being fired and Peter Chiarelli finding himself in LA, because they're obviously just redoing it. So
just going through the whole process again.
I don't. There's 32 of these jobs.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, that's the big question. Is like, why can't we do better than these
Surely
guys again?
you can find somebody else in the league who can be a general manager.
Like, it feels like they go like, well, there's 40 guys who have done it before. We have to hire one of them. Like, do you?
It feels both the Anaheim and LA move feels very old Pacific.
Yeah.
The Pacific was always going to be 15 years behind the rest of the league in terms of, everyone else is moving to fast, pacey, quick-moving hockey, and there was the Pacific playing big-bodied, heavy, bash and crash hockey. And once again, Joel Quenneville and Ken Holland, great hires 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Fantastic hire 10, 15 years ago. You look at it and go, yep, okay, I can see that. We hadn't seen everything that Ken Holland was going to do to Detroit in that time, so we can get away with it. All right, we've done it long enough. We've avoided it long enough. Let's get into what has happened. Yeah. So, obviously, let's begin because we're not going to make you all wait for it. Florida defeats the Toronto Maple Leafs in 7 games, but do not fool yourself with the idea that meant it was a close series. Toronto were 2 games up and 2-0 up and lost the series. 2 of those games, they conceded 6.
Yeah.
Right.
They had obviously, like when you, as much as like the rhetoric around the playoffs is like, it's not a problem until you lose at home. And obviously the teams who were at home won each game in this series up until today. There was, 2-2, back and forth. But statistically, that doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. Like teams that go 2-0 up generally win the series by like a significant margin. You have that, all you have to do is win 2 out of the next 5 games. That's kind of how you have to look at it. Like, yeah, okay, it's hard to like sweep an opponent, especially a good opponent. No one was necessarily expecting them to do that. But if they just win that game, that 3rd game of the series, like statistically, they are, in with a tap in. They just need to like have one more not complete breakdown to win the series, really.
And then they got, but what is baffling to me is the 2 massacres are both in Toronto. Both in Toronto. The 6 goal games are both in Toronto. Like, they absolutely fell in a heap. Absolutely fell in a heap. And there was like, Dangle in particular made a big point about the noise because they came out and started talking about the noise. And, everyone's like, you mean the fans? You mean those people that are supposed to be cheering for you? You think they're noise. Okay, this is a problem if you think that that's the distraction is the noise around the team. I kind of feel like, and this is the question, is that there was a really good bit of analysis done by Chris Johnston post-game, and I was talking to you about this before we started recording, and he talked about one of the things that let this team down was that most of the other teams in the playoffs played other lineups across the second half of the season so that when they got into the playoffs, they'd have different combos they knew they could use if they need to go to it. They'd have different ideas, they'd have different line changes that they could make. And one of the things that they found with Craig Berube, and he's very stuck in what he wants to do, is that Berube just kept his lines and just played the same lines. And so when it got to this part of the game and they suddenly go from being right in it and it's tight to like 6 minutes of madness where they find themselves 3 down. He had nothing to go to. And so it took him until the 3rd to start just throwing bizarre lines out there, but they had no chemistry.
For me, it's not even for an adjustment. Like, it wasn't even, he didn't even call a timeout. No. Like, those first 2 goals, like, okay, look, your goalie lets in a bad one or whatever, or, something, you get a bad bounce or something like that. All right, the team's a little disheartened. It happens again, you're 2 down. At that point, you have to at least give them like a mental break from that. Like, if you're going to use a timeout at any point, it's when you're in an elimination game, you've suddenly gone 2 down, and now you've got a hill to climb.
Yes, stop it.
And yeah, there was no, it was just like, oh, we'll just keep running it back. We'll just, we'll just go straight back out there. And they were struggling. Like at that, that point early in the second period, they looked like they had given up. Like, in that first few
They were
minutes.
crunch drunk by that point. They were just
Yeah, I mean, but in that early first few minutes, they just kind of looked like they were throwing the puck out, trying to survive. They weren't skating with them. They weren't doing anything to generate any kind of offense. So when that 3-0 game, goal went in, that was pretty much it. Like the game was over at that point, and there was still 35 minutes to play or something.
I've never seen a team in the playoffs spend so long throwing the puck down the center of the ice. Like they just kept doing stupid spinorama passes into the center of the ice. They did it 4 or 5 times. Like in this game, they did it in game 5 as well. The first of the goals that Florida scored in that one, I think it was the first one, was Mitch Marner does a stupid backhand spin around pass and flicks it towards Austin Matthews. And it's never making it there. And it's just intercepted. They go straight down the ice and score. In the first goal in this one, right? The puck goes back. It gets on the stick of Morgan Riley in defense.
Yeah.
And Morgan Riley throws it right down the middle of the ice, straight to an oncoming attacker. And you're like, what? And then the other thing is, when they threw it down the middle of the ice and the Panthers took the puck, they all stood there and just like watched as Florida moved up the ice to go score. And I've never seen players freeze so regularly and it's not the backup, the depth players in Toronto kind of did their job. Like they were the lines that were holding okay. They were the lines that seemed to be moving okay. They were scoring the goal. Domi scored the goal. Like you've got players that are like Austin Matthews scores 1 in game 6. Like, well, there we go. Matthews has fixed his. He doesn't score big goals. I look at the amount of money you pay. And we talked about this last year and we talked about this the year before. You are paying that core of players to be game changers and difference makers at this time of the year. And they are anything but game changing.
I don't know what it is. Like, obviously, the talent is there. And, I don't even want to call it like, effort or anything like that. I just think that there is I don't know if they're just gripping the stick too hard at this time of year because of the pressure. Obviously, at this point in time, they've developed a reputation of not being able to close out opponents. They're gripping the stick too tightly. I almost just kind of feel like they need some way to kind of lighten the mood. Someone who is just going to go.
They did that. It was Ryan Reed.
Into every. Yeah, but like I know what you mean. I'm certainly not suggesting like that kind of player. But like, as much as over the years it's just like, oh, what are you going to get back for this? Sometimes I think that there is just like an attitude kind of shift. If you think about it from like a Penguins perspective, they made a trade for Patrick Hornqvist before like their wins, who was kind of like a culture changer. Like, he I don't think he was necessarily a better player at that point in time than James Neal, who they traded for him, but he was kind of like the right mentality that like even in a game that you were getting thrashed, he was the kind of player who was getting in all of those kind of dirty spots, had the right attitude, was kind of getting people like back up and into it and stuff like that. And obviously like there are players on that kind of bench like like Crosby. You don't see Crosby hang his head and decide that it's all over or anything like that. Like, and I feel like Toronto just doesn't have that mentality, that kind of mental game to be able to hang with it when they get to that level of adversity.
I think part of it too for me is to use the Sharks as an example.
Yeah.
If you remember what the issue was when the Sharks went out and got Erik Karlsson. And the biggest problem that the Sharks faced with Erik Karlsson on the team initially was you had Erik Karlsson and you had Brent Burns, who were the same player.
Yeah.
Who did the same thing. And it didn't work because you had two guys who wanted to do the exact same thing and only one of them can do that. So if you've got two guys trying to do the same thing, they clash. It doesn't quite work. You don't quite know what they're doing. I often feel that part of the problem with the core four is that, I mean, Tavares will sort of do whatever a little bit, but I think like with three of the four, I think Matthews, Marner, and Nylander all want to do the same thing.
They're all kind of playing the same role.
They play the same game. They all want to do the same thing. You need variance. You need something to change that up. You can't have all three of those. All three of those players want the puck on their stick, believe they are the best player with the puck on the stick, believe they're the one who's going to score the goal. When they're in offense, they're frozen because he's going to do it, but am I going to do it? But where am I? And how are they positioning themselves relating to the others in terms of who's going to score, who's going to move the puck around, who wants the puck on their stick, who's leading that charge into the zone, who's the one directing the play, who is moving things around where and when. The Leafs don't have one of those players who's like, it is me, and you will do what I want you to do because that's going to be successful. One of the things that I think is interesting about the way that Draisaitl and McDavid play is they kind of do very similar things, but they take it in turns. And one of them will know. Well, like McDavid will go, well, if I'm clearly going to be marked up and guarded and stuff like that, Leon, it's yours. And Draisaitl will do it. And the second they move on to Draisaitl has no problem ego-wise going, Connor, yours, right? And it doesn't ever feel like Toronto has the same thing going on. Not they're fighting over it, but they're unsure in their own mind.
It never feels like, oh, okay, all right, they're posting up on Matthews or whatever, so, Marner's going to get it done. Or
whose team offensively is it? Is it Marner's team? Is it Matthews' team? Is it Nylander's team? The stats in terms of when playoffs come around will tell you it's William Nylander's team in the playoffs.
Yeah, because it's funny. It doesn't sound like it should be a big problem. Like, it doesn't sound like on paper it should be a problem to have, like, we've got all of these really talented guys who are great, do all these things, put up all these points or whatever. But the mix is just clearly not.
Someone's got to do the grunt work.
Yeah, when it gets hard, look at that. Yeah, and it hasn't been enough so far what they've tried to do to do it. It clearly, I think the experiment is over. I think the experiment.
So the other thing, the other reference here I can put in here is Real Madrid in the Spanish league in football. Is that they've gone out in the last 12 months and they've grabbed the biggest name on the planet in Kylian Mbappe, and it hasn't worked. And why hasn't it worked? Well, they've got another forward up front who doesn't do a lot of grunt work and running back. Mbappe doesn't run back. He stands up front waiting for the ball. He doesn't come back and defend. So they've got two guys up front who don't come back and defend. They've just signed from my club, well, they're about to, Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's a right back, but he's an attacking right back. He doesn't do a lot of running back and defending. I can see all of this failing because now this is a team of 11 players, 10 on the field, and the 10 on the field now have 3 players who don't want to do the grunt work and don't want to come back and actually defend and drop deep in positions, which means you've got to rework an entire team to fit these 3 players into the lineup because you're going to have weaknesses popping up because that mix is just wrong. And it's Toronto's problem is the mix doesn't work. This is not that they are terrible players. Mitch Marner is not a bad hockey player. William Nylander, not a bad hockey player. Austin Matthews, not a bad hockey player. You put the 3 of them together, the mix doesn't work. You've got to make a change somewhere and you have to sacrifice. And this is something Kyle Dubas tried to do. And this is where we will eventually, by the way, Panthers fans, talk about you. But this is far more important at this point in time. This is where it comes back to who's going to face the firing squad this offseason. Because we'll talk about Mitch in a minute, but we need to talk about the one who is probably going to face the firing squad. And I refer, of course, to Brendan Shanahan, who is the person who stubbornly built this with Kyle Dubas and then basically booted Kyle when Kyle wanted to maybe move Mitch Marner and had said he wanted to move Mitch Marner, and Shanahan was nope. And there's a really interesting piece on The Athletic by it was Jonas Siegel, and he was talking about the interesting part is that Shanahan didn't learn from the Red Wings, because he was talking about the fact that what Detroit did was they had a plan, but they adapted the plan. And Shanahan was actually the last piece of that plan. When they moved out Paul Coffey and they moved out Keith Primeau and they brought in Shanahan, and that was the piece that then put them over the top to go and win the Cups. And the irony of him being the piece that sort of changed up that mix, and they took out really brilliant players to bring him in because he was something different that gave him an edge. And yet the team that he's built is struggling because he won't put one of the pieces out to give them an edge. It's kind of a really interesting way of looking at it. But I think Shanahan probably is the one that has to wear this bullet.
Mm.
Like, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone else has been cycled out at this point in time. Like, you know, all of the other bullets have been shot. Like that's kind of it. I don't know. I don't know what you do as Toronto kind of going forward from here, because the two big, like, you know, in theory, if they let Mitch Marner and John Tavares walk, they probably won't let both walk. But if they did, they've got like 21 million in cap space, but they don't have anyone to sign with that. Like, the two biggest free agents on the market are those two guys. You know, there's no one else.
Like, and this is where Mitch Marner exercising his, and like, I get really frustrated with Leafs fans complaining about Marner exercising his no trade. He has a no trade.
Mm.
He's allowed to exercise the no trade. You gave it to him. You give him a no trade. Guess what? He can use it. And he did. Now, you know, you have ended up, obviously, all the conversations were that you were going to end up with a really good piece in return. Yeah. But he has the right, because you gave him the contract with the no trade. He can say no, right? If you didn't want him to be able to do that, don't give him a no trade. That's simple. They're going to lose Marner for nothing, because I think there is zero chance that Toronto or Marner wants to do this again.
No.
I don't think that either side
I think they want to change.
I see a future for Mitch Marner playing probably on the wing of Connor Bedard. It feels like a Chicago move.
There'll be some team that can pay him 15 plus million.
Yeah, it feels like a Chicago move to make Mitch Marner the highest paid player in the league. John Tavares, look, he wants to come back at a reduced rate. If I'm Toronto, I probably do bring him back if he wants a reduced rate. But
what other option do you have, really? Like,
I don't think this is the thing. I'm convinced they're not going to. I don't think they're going to bring them both back. I think that neither of them will return.
It's entirely possible. I mean, if you're Tavares and you want one more shot at a cup, why are you signing?
But I also think that the Ducks will probably try to throw money at him as the veteran presence for Joel Quenneville. Yeah. I did laugh before and think to myself that, you know, Tavares signed for the Leafs over the Sharks. It might be time for the Sharks to finally get him as the experienced player in that lineup. I could see that working too. But the players that did things for the Leafs, and this is where it gets really interesting too, because even if you lose the Tavares and the Marner contracts off the books, they're going to pay Matthew Nyes.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay Robertson. Robertson will get something. Matthew Nyes is going to get paid. And this is the thing. Should he get a big contract? No. But is he going to get a contract that might get a bit awkward later on? Probably.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing. The other thing that I would talk about is, as much as they keep suggesting that this defense is set, I kind of feel like if you can move off Morgan Riley at this point, you probably should. I kind of feel like it's just time. And this is the thing. I think if you
if they're doing that, then they're basically just rebuilding at that point in time. They're just...
No, that won't be rebuilding. It's retooling on the fly. But yeah, like the problem is, and you talked about it, the free agents coming up this year are not great.
Much there. No, there's not much. There's not much there.
There's not actually a hell of a lot coming up in terms of free agents. Like there's
unless they're going to offer sheet Evan Bouchard, I don't know what they're going to do.
I mean, they could do worse.
Yeah, I mean, look, like it's a great choice. They won't do it, but it's a bold move.
I think that you could do a lot worse than.
I'm actually not sure whether he's eligible for an office sheet because he has arbitration. I have to look up the rules for that again.
But this is the problem. I think that who the hell somebody put forward here the trade bait list. Macklin Celebrini. That's a load of garbage. Anyway, that's not going to happen. But
yeah,
to come back to Toronto before we move on to Florida, I mean, we'll talk about Florida in a moment. They've got to do something different. They can't do this again. They broke a bunch of records today. It's the equal largest loss in a Game 7 in NHL history. They moved to 0-8 in elimination games. With
Paul Maurice moving to 6-0
with Paul Maurice moving the other way. Not bad for a guy that Leafs fans chased out of Toronto. As all the people who are a bit smarter said about Paul Maurice in Toronto, find me the time he had a goalie. He didn't. What the hell were they playing at with putting Stollarz on the ice before the game, knowing he couldn't play?
Yeah.
Getting everyone excited about that. And then when Joseph Woll was getting shelled,
there was no choice to no one
couldn't bring him off the bench. And everyone's like, well, why is Woll still out there? Because Stollarz has a concussion.
Yeah,
right?
He can't play.
He's not healthy. And it wasn't just the elbow. As I pointed out in the last podcast, he took a puck to the head. And the puck to the head was the first concussion blow. The elbow didn't help him, but the puck to the head was the first concussion blow, right? Them's the breaks. Look, we'll talk about them in a minute, but the Oilers had to play Stuart Skinner, and they survived it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't Joseph Woll's fault. The team stopped playing. What do you think, just before we move on to Florida, what do you think, two questions. What do you think about Berube's management in the series? And my second question is, Austin Matthews. What do we think of Matthews post-series? Is there a difference in the way we view him?
Look, it's in terms of Berube, certainly I wasn't impressed with, as we kind of already talked about, there were certainly a lot of things that he could have done that was that would have at least given them something. He just kind of didn't really do anything during that time. Your team got significantly outshot in the second period. They let me pull up the actual stat for it. But
the shooting
stat 15 to 18. Sorry, 5 to 18 in the second period. They just got absolutely shelled. It was pretty close. The first and the third were okay. They weren't doing great, but they were surviving. And then they just totally got run over in that second period, and there was no adjustment. There was no we'll try something different. There was no make a change some way. Obviously, he didn't have another goalie that he could put out, but there wasn't even a timeout, as we talked about. Not certainly not impressed from that regard. Needed to get something for those guys to pull their heads out of their shoulders and actually kind of start playing again, because to get outshot 33-21, and it probably would have been a lot worse if they didn't put up maybe 5 or 6 nothing shots in the third period when they were trailing.
Well, just quickly on that, in terms of shot attempts, now not on, but shot attempts, the Leafs conceded the most allowed by any team in the first 2 periods of a game across the whole season. 75 shot attempts in the first 2 periods overall. Now, obviously not all on, but 75 shot attempts for Florida. That is the worst of any team in the season or playoffs. Yeah. So think about how bad some of the teams have been this year. Nobody in the first 2 periods of a game conceded more shot attempts than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, they were just getting run over, and and it didn't, a lot of those Florida chances were nothing really special. There was some that just kind of went through Wall. There were some that really they shouldn't have had that chance. They shouldn't have been in that position to tap that in. Probably could have been a lot worse. There was a goal that was called off that I feel like probably should have counted.
Yeah, they were lucky. They could have been worse.
Yeah, and
how do you say it could have been worse at 6-1?
I know, it's
Um,
shocking. There could have been 4-0 down at that point. But in terms of Austin Matthews, I saw a quote from him after the game asking whether or not he was healthy. And his quote was, "I don't know. I'm not really going to address that right now. You go out there and just try and compete and give it your all." And that's what I was trying to do. To me, it just sounds like he's over it. Like he is just emotionally broken at this point in time.
at what point does he ask for a trade?
Yeah, I mean,
I
look,
don't want to stir. I don't want to stir a fight with Leafs fans and go, "Oh, they're all going to go."
I-
But at what point does Austin
no.
Matthews go?
I think
Hey,
he's going out there. He's trying his best. Like I think
he is,
legitimately,
but it's not.
probably he's not healthy like everyone else. But at the same time, like, and yeah, okay, you want more from him, you want this or whatever. But I just think he's so beaten down at this point that it's
That's what
probably
I
the
mean.
same kind of thing as like Eichel and players like that who get traded somewhere else all of a sudden and get a chance to like not have to deal with that baggage, and all of a sudden he's probably great.
But that's what I mean with like Matthews. It's not so much that I think he needs to leave or that I think he's terrible and Toronto should move him. My point is, if you're Austin Matthews, at what point do you look around in Toronto and go, I just need to go somewhere else? Like, this is something I need to do. And like, for Leafs fans who might come at me for this, first of all, as anyone who's ever paid any attention to this podcast will know, I am one of the world's largest Austin Matthews fans. He's probably my favorite player to watch in the whole league. So I don't say this, oh, he's terrible. No, I love the player. But if, especially Toronto fans for the last few seasons in particular, every time Edmonton get eliminated, when's Connor going to want to leave? Connor going to want to leave? You can't ask the question about McDavid and when's McDavid going to want to leave. And Austin Matthews is sitting right there. And this is happening every year. And every year he's got to go out and answer questions about it. At some point, you know what? I don't need to be here. And like, it's not the noise.
When someone talks to his friends, when he's talking to his friends and they ask him, like, do you think that they're giving you everything you need to succeed? There's no fucking way he says yes.
God, no. There's no way, as much as he's the whole, he's my brother and we want him here and blah, blah, blah about Mitch today. He's not going to shed a tear if Marner moves and they give him something that's going to be more conducive to his game. If they bring in someone who's more conducive to what Matthews wants to do, and he doesn't have to sort of have a 1-1A conversation about Marner or Matthews, who's the straw that stirs the drink. If it's Matthews' line and he is it, he's not going to complain about that. Because Nylander's not the personality to try to take a line over or say that it's got to be him. That's not William Nylander. William Nylander's like, score goals. I don't whatever. But the Marner Matthews thing, I think, is done. I think it's got to be broken up. And I think they'll both be better for it. I genuinely think both players will improve for that because both players will be given the chance to shine. It's why I also do think, before we'll move on in a second, that's why I also think that him going to Chicago would probably be a bad idea, not a good idea, because you get the same thing with Connor Bedard and Mitch Marner. Yeah. And then it's okay, who's running that line? Is it Bedard or is it Marner? Florida, just quickly, they're a beast. And
I mean, look, I think that we obviously underestimated them coming into this, this playoffs. We didn't really expect, based on their regular season, that they would kind of, have a significant chance to run it back and win, back to back. Obviously, they've still got 2 rounds to get through before that's, the case. But they look good. Like they look deep. There may be. I don't know if they're the team of last year still, but it might be enough. It's certainly probably going to be enough in the East. We'll see how that plays out. But
my 2 favorite statistics from today. First of all, Brad Marchand now becomes the first player in NHL history to defeat the same opponent in at least 5 winner-take-all games. He is 5-0 in winner-take-all games.
That's incredible.
The Leafs.
And he had 2 points today.
Secondly, and far more importantly, Boston fans celebrate because in Florida winning today, they make it to the 3rd round. And as they make it to the 3rd round, you get a 1st-round pick. So Florida now gives their 1st-round pick to Boston. So Toronto losing means Boston wins. You can't
You can't have more than that. Yeah.
Here's the thing,
Right.
and we'll move on now, but here's the thing. We said it before, but genuinely, I don't think anyone in the world doubted that Toronto were going to win Game 6 because they had to go to Game 7 and lose.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely. There was no possible way it could have been funnier.
Nobody anticipated we were going to lose this. They were going to lose this in Game 6 because everybody knew that Toronto was going to lose this in Game 7. It was an absolute laid out. It was obvious what was going to happen, and they did it to the script.
Yeah,
Unreal
death, taxes,
work.
and Toronto blowing it in 7.
No notes, Toronto. No notes. You know the script really, 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 really well. All right, let's go to another game. Carolina, Washington.
Yeah.
The worrying part for me is that I actually felt that despite the fact that Toronto got to 7 games, that I thought the 5-game and 6-game series were a bit tighter.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, at times, like, there were a lot of games. I think there's actually been a lot of series that have kind of gone 5 or 6 in this playoffs that have probably could have gone the other way, like with a goal or two the other way. I don't feel like it didn't seem like Washington kind of had it in this series, though. Like, they just weren't really able to score on Carolina.
It was only... they were, we talked about this in the regular season when we were like, oh, they're going to be relying on Ovi. And they didn't kind of rely on Ovi in the regular season, even though he had that amazing scoring run. They didn't rely on him.
Even when he was out with a broken leg, they kept rolling.
But in the playoffs, they were very reliant on what Ovi was going to do, and they held him to 1 goal, and there was just no depth scoring at all in Washington. It just dried up completely.
Carolina, it looked like Washington of old, really.
Carolina also, the other thing is too, you got to remember, Carolina are not a high scoring team.
No.
But we've talked about this in the previews for the playoffs. What Carolina do is choke the life out of you.
Yeah.
And they just constricted. They are a boa constrictor. And they just constricted Washington and like stopped the airflow to Ovi. And by cutting all of that off, there was no extra scoring. Freddie Anderson, apparently if you give your goalie a new contract in the middle of the playoffs,
that's enough.
Right.
Yeah, he's been doing really good. Incredible high danger save percentage. I don't know whether or not that's going to keep up, but it certainly worked for them in this series, and that was all they really needed in the end. They just kind of had the better depth scoring, really. The Washington had some injuries and stuff that like Protest was out, I think, for the first few games of the season for the series. Came back and was good, but it just kind of wasn't really enough in the end to get them across the line.
I think it's going to be a really interesting, but possibly very boring. And when we get into the preview, but interesting, but possibly boring Eastern Conference final, because both Florida and Carolina have the ability to just
grind it out,
suffocate the other team.
Yeah.
And what happens when you get, for anyone who's watches things like MMA, for example, you just get 2 fighters who want to go to the ground and they just lay on each other.
It could be a lot of 2-1 games, I think.
And no one moves for all the rounds, and just I got you in the headlock.
Could be a few overtime finishes in this one. I think.
And then at the end of it, someone's like, "Oh, one of us has to win." Okay,
one of us has to win. All right.
Sure. Look, I'm not shocked that Carolina won. I had Carolina going deep. It's one of the few predictions I've made that's come true. Was that Carolina would go deep into this one. So I feel like it's accurate. Dallas and Winnipeg. Now, what I find really interesting about this series, we talked a lot about they'll go as far as kind of Hellebuck lets them.
Yeah.
Now, he was very inconsistent again in this series. But in the deciding game, he was actually really good.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. He was not great in the whole of the playoffs. But in game 6 where they lose to Dallas, he was really good. So you can't really put the fault there for this. Although on the whole of the series and the whole of the playoffs, I think Connor Hellebuck would probably want this playoff run back.
Yeah. Yeah, it hasn't been great overall, that's for sure. Like, there's been games where he's kind of, looked like himself, but certainly hasn't been, consistent regular season Connor Hellebuck.
Now, obviously, Game 6 was sort of the headline in Game 6 was, Mark Scheifele's father died before the game. He played and then scored the first goal because, of course, he did. That just makes sense. But then Dallas come back, equalize it, and then obviously get the overtime winner to take the series. Winnipeg and their failure to win away from Winnipeg.
Yeah, 0-6 on the road in the playoffs is a hell of a stat. Like, it's shocking that they got to the second round with that kind of performance.
Well, we talked about it. Like the first round, they were very lucky to get through the first round because Hellebuck's form in that first round was atrocious.
Oh yeah,
like he got absolutely shelled. But Dallas, look, we know that I know de Boer hockey. I am hesitant in saying de Boer hockey can work, but I will say that Dallas got stronger as the series rolled on.
Yeah.
And I think that Dallas, since watching them against Colorado, and obviously I had Colorado in that series, Dallas sort of just ducked past Colorado. But then as I watched them through the Winnipeg series, it's building. It's genuinely building, and they're looking more impressive every game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I think, we talked about it early on, even in their first series, where, it was a matter of, can they last out long enough to get healthy? And, they now have Jason Robertson back. He hasn't been quite, total form, but, Mikko Rantanen has kind of picked up the slack.
Mikko Rantanen's been insane.
Absolutely insane. Like back-to-back, a hat trick in 2 games, setting insane records, just, putting the team on his back. The fact that, like, having the ability to have, like, it just kind of feels to me like this might be a thing where we look back on their cup run and kind of go, if they get through all the way through and win, it'll be one of those things where you kind of look back and go, oh, okay, all right, well, they needed this guy to step up in round 1, they needed this guy to step up in round 2, and they've got all of those kind of pieces of a storybook kind of cup winning team of different guys stepping up in those situations. Ottinger might steal the next series, and then this might have like you need like contributions down the lineup from a whole bunch of different guys, and so far they're getting it.
And that's been the interesting bit too, is that Ottinger's been fine without being great.
Yeah.
So
and he could he could step up to another level. He could be the the difference maker in the next series.
And he might well need to be, because the next series is the rematch with Edmonton. So Edmonton defeat Vegas in 5. The thing for me in this one was Vegas fell back into the old Vegas trap.
Yeah.
Which was, when we talked about this before, I always talk about Vegas rolling like an egg until they managed to win the cup. But one of the things about old Vegas was, well, where are the goals coming from? Because they're going to be able to hold people out, but where are the goals coming from? The goals dried up completely. Now, Stuart Skinner did play better in this series. He had to step in because Pickard had to go, went out. Neither of them have been brilliant still, and I've got Edmonton friends of mine who keep messaging me going, how about a bit of credit for that Stuart Skinner? And he was better, but he's still not great. It felt less like it was about Stuart Skinner stepping up, and it felt a lot more like Vegas just seemed to forget how to score goals.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, back-to-back shutouts to close out the series is, incredible. But even with that factored in, his overall like playoff save percentage is still like sub 900. Like, it's just offsetting how shit it was at the beginning. So I wouldn't be confident to be like, oh yeah, he's going to be in shutout form in the next time he plays. I couldn't guarantee that. I couldn't guarantee that he's going to put up more than 850.
Now, Justin asked the question in the group, can the Oilers bring the cup home? Now, as everybody is very aware, I remain an Oilers doubter. I just feel like they've added some depth. They've done a better job than they've done in previous years. I still don't think that the depth is strong enough. And we'll sort of slide a little bit into the preview now as well, because we might as well as part of the tail end of this. Yeah. Because I don't think there's much to talk about with Vegas at the moment. They just didn't score.
It just didn't happen for them. It is what it is.
I don't believe they have the goaltending to win the cup. I have absolutely zero faith that they can get 2 series worth of good goaltending out of Pickard Skinner as a tandem.
Yeah,
I
that's the
don't
question
believe
for
they
me,
can do it.
for me too. Like, I mean, I don't ever want to rule out Connor McDavid, like in terms of the ability for McDavid and Draisaitl to be able to take over a series
Oh, if they
is good,
don't
but
make it, if they don't win it, it's not going to be those two.
yeah, but they are always skating uphill because of the rest of the team. It's just always a matter of like, can they score enough to offset what they're going to give up
Like
in
we're always,
goaltending.
you're always a floated puck from center ice away from Stuart Skinner doing something stupid.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the big kind of that's the real tough thing to do when you're going to play against like a really good defensive team, because if you're going to score 2 or 3, you might be still giving up 4. But that's I think that's the big question mark. Rolling the dice, yeah, absolutely, they've got the chance to do it. Like they certainly could do it if they if they get a gargantuan performance from McDavid and Draisaitl. That's the path to victory for them, and they probably need the magic to last for one of their goaltenders for the next couple of series. I probably wouldn't be putting my money on it. I think that Dallas is kind of the engine that has more chance of doing it from the West.
Dallas can, for me, they can run more lines more often.
Mm.
They've got more lines that can play. And I think that's genuine. I also think that Dallas have, while Evan Bouchard has obviously been really good, and no one's doubting Evan Bouchard, I think the Dallas defense, I would take that any day of the week over the Edmonton defense. Still, I think that the Dallas defense is very strong. I think Ottinger has less bad games in him than a Stuart Skinner and a Calvin Pickard.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that defense, if that defense decides to step up and keeps the other two quiet, I don't think you're going to get errors. And I think you're going to have Dallas can do something that Vegas can't, which is Dallas can put scoring pressure on Edmonton, and they can put them on the back foot. Vegas's big thing was they could hem them up in the middle of the ice, but they couldn't get pressure in that final third to really sort of make Skinner have to make the saves, make Pickett have to make saves, make that defense have to step up, but also put McDavid and Draisaitl on their heels. And we've talked about this a lot, and we saw it last year in the Cup final a bit, and we also saw it whenever, and this is something we've seen too whenever LA's been successful, is the way to get at Edmonton is you keep McDavid and Draisaitl on their heels.
Yeah, make them defend.
You don't let them have to break forward. You make them do the thing they don't want to have to do, right? They are better at it than, say, for example, Ovi, who just won't. But they will come back and they will do it, and they will do a decent job of it. But that's not what they're on the ice for. So what you're then more likely to get is if you keep hemming them back in and hemming them back in, you will see less and less ice time for those two, because they'll pull them off to put a more defensive lineup on to sort of clear the zone, to get the puck out, to then get them back on the ice. One of two things will happen. They will either take them off and take them off and take them off and take them off, and you don't have to worry about breakaways, or they'll leave them on and they will wear them out. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to put Edmonton on their heels. You've got to make Knobloch have to use the whole bench and have to rotate that bench, because every time he gives you a look at someone that are not those two players, you've got a big chance.
Yeah.
And you want to make him have to do that, right? He doesn't want to have to do that. He doesn't want to have to roll those other lines, right? Make him do it. So if he's going to beat you, make him beat you with the third line.
Yeah.
And I think that Dallas would be very comfortable going up against the Edmonton third line.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about it as well. I feel like Edmonton are gonna take a couple of games, but I'm picking Dallas in 6.
Yeah, I think Dallas in 6 feels about fair. I think that McDavid and Draisaitl will have at least one, if not 2 games where they're just unplayable.
Yeah.
But I think Dallas can ride that. And I think the key for Dallas is that if McDavid and Draisaitl have a big breakout game, the key is to just ignore it. Okay, it happened.
Let's move on. We'll move on next game.
What I think the right attitude for Dallas to have, if that happens, is we expect that at some point they're going to go off. So if it happens, we're not shocked or hurt. We're like, yeah, that was coming. Cool. Next game.
Yeah.
and just
Now we'll
move
shut
into
them
the
down.
next one, right? And
Yeah.
and that's the hardest part with Edmonton. Edmonton's strength is having those two and keeping you off balance because they're like at any point in time they can just decide this is over.
Yeah.
And your job as a team is to stop that from being the case. And if they do get on a run, don't fall into the trap of, oh well, this is over. Just okay, move on, do it again. Right? Beat us again. Keep beating us.
It's a new game next week.
Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
Now the Eastern Conference, I think, as I said, is a battle of really constricting teams, but I've gone back.
I feel like Florida's got more firepower out of the two, though. Like, if we're looking at them as like playing a similar style where they're gonna run their depth and kind of go up and down the lineup and try to stop each other from scoring, I feel like Florida has got a little bit more bite to them.
I've been back and forward on this because I've felt the whole way along that Carolina are kind of destined for a cup final at some point. And I really, I'm still 50-50 on my call here because I agree. I think last year we talked about it in the cup final, and what Florida did that Edmonton couldn't do was run 4 lines and 4 good lines. And they could beat you in any way they needed to beat you. If they were going to outscore you, they could outscore you. If they were going to stop you from scoring, they could do that too. If they were going to grind one out, they were going to do that. If they were going to like tic-tac-toe, if it was going to be a sprint up and down, it didn't matter. Florida had the players to beat you in every format of hockey that you could think of. And they've still got that. But I just feel like Carolina's in that last chance saloon.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and they've got that depth scoring too this year. Like it's whether it will last, I don't know.
The other thing is, I'm kind of and I know it sounds weird to say this when Freddie Anderson's the other goalie.
Yeah,
but we're kind of due for Bobrovsky to turn back into a pumpkin.
Yeah, that's true.
Like
yeah.
we are due. Like we are at the point. Remember last year, he was unbeatable. And then he had a wobble.
Yeah.
Like he had a wobble. It happened. It was a thing.
It's due at some point in time.
I think we're due for the Bobrovsky wobble. And I'm going to go Carolina in 7.
Okay. Yeah,
I just feel like part of it is I want Brent Burns to get a cup before he retires. Damn it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it would be nice. I'd be happy either way. I think Carolina has been a team that I've been expecting to break through for many years now, and it hasn't really totally happened. I would be happy to see them, but if I had to pick one, I think I'm going to go Florida in 6.
What I think is really interesting is I don't think that any of these teams. Every year we talk about it. Well, you're going to copy what happens and how you win a cup.
Yeah.
I don't think any of these teams have a blueprint that you can copy. I don't think they do. I think
Florida might be the closest. Florida might be the closest because they're built from like a bunch of trades, and they're built from like kind of a handful of kind of smart moves that maybe would be smart to like emulate in terms of the way that they built themselves.
What I would say with that is, though, you've got to have the right cattle to move to do what Florida did.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many teams out there really have, especially the no move clauses, which is
I mean, look, no one's in the opportunity to make the Matthew Tkachuk trade, most years, that's for sure.
And this is my other thing too, is that for me, part of the reason why I look at it and go, like, I understand what Florida did. I think there are so many no move clauses in these teams now that need to make these moves. They don't have the option. Like, remember, we talked about it before. Toronto tried. They tried to get out from under the Marner contract. And he had the ability to stop it, which he did because he could. And I think that there are a lot of teams out there who would like to do what Florida did and understand what Florida did. But the players are tied.
Yeah.
And they don't have the ability to get out from under the deals. So I think that Florida's really hard to emulate because of other general managers being idiots.
Yeah.
I think Edmonton, they don't really have. You can't copy having Draisaitl and McDavid. You can't copy that as a twofer.
You're like, just draft McDavid. Oh, okay.
Dallas have sort of they're sort of almost Florida light
Yeah.
in terms of some really good moves to go out and get pieces. And Carolina just went out and signed every veteran they could think of to go with the good couple of young players they had. And just where we just hope the legs don't fall off, or we just put enough of you together and you make a single player. Like just one player. We just bunch you all together.
Take Taylor Hall's legs and we'll take,
Yeah, we'll take Taylor Hall's, Brent Burns. You don't have to move. Just stand there. Brent, just stand there and smack. That's all you got to do. I don't think that teams are going to go to copy this. So
yeah, I mean, look, I think it's always folly, realistically, to look at that and kind of go, oh, we need to emulate this style. Like it's not easy to do for any team, realistically. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting batch. Like I think we've gotten a handful of teams that maybe weren't anyone's pick coming in, but I think we also had like a fairly kind of open bracket.
We said that we didn't think there was like overwhelmingly
an obvious pick. Yeah.
And the other thing that I would say is that while you didn't necessarily have these teams in the 4, when you get to the 4 and look at what 4 are left, when you look at it, you go, yeah, of course.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. We've got
none of this. I don't look at this and go, that's a shock. I look at it and go, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like we had, we have last year's Cup finalists. We have Dallas, who's been in the Western Conference Final now 3 years in a row, and we have Carolina, who was one of the more consistent teams and
have been perennially nearly men. So
yeah, it makes sense. I think that the quality won out in the end of the batch of the shiny rocks got are still in there, shifted out with all of the crap. I can't say that I'm confident in picking a winner at this point in time, but I did pick Dallas in my bracket, and that could still work because everyone else in my bracket is out.
I mean, look,
absolutely, everyone else in my bracket is out, but I could still win that one.
I had the winner of Dallas and Colorado winning it all. It was just I got the wrong winner, but I genuinely I said at the time, whoever comes out of that, for me is the favorite in the West.
That's got a good chance.
And nothing changes my mind on that. And watching,
Edmonton, I think I'm still in that boat as well. That's the team that I like the most, top to bottom.
My other thing about that is, and just before we finish up, is that and I get a bit from Edmonton people about not believing in them. And I said I believe in McDavid and I believe in Draisaitl. Still don't believe in the build of the team, and I just look at it and I just think that Edmonton's path here, Vegas were not great. They played part of that. They were very good at stifling them.
Yeah.
But they were 2-0 down to the Kings. And that Kings team, they've played the Kings so often now, they should be able to beat the Kings in their sleep.
Yeah. They should know. I mean, last thing I'll say about Edmonton for me is that, I've seen a lot of people going Edmonton is scary. This is. I think that there's a bias that people have towards Canadian teams for some weird reason. I don't understand. Yeah. We're not Canadians, but there seems to be this weird thing in Australia that we consider ourselves kind of de facto Canadians. Maybe we've just got a lot of expats, but there's. If you take the best 2 players off the other 3 teams that are still in and replace them with McDavid and Draisaitl, absolutely, I'm picking that team to win the cup.
If you put McDavid and Draisaitl on Dallas, they haven't lost a game.
Yeah, but you can take Rantanen and Robertson off and replace them with those 2. I will pick that team. It's not those star players for me. It's the surrounding cast. It's everything else. It's like the rest of the teams still in have a better surrounding cast, and it's just a matter of how far McDavid and Draisaitl can drag them to overcome that.
And to finish up, my view on this is if you want to follow a team that you think plays good Canadian hockey, the Florida Panthers are your team.
Yeah.
Because they kind of do.
Yeah.
Florida and Carolina probably played the most Canadian hockey out of the 4 teams left. So, I'd argue those 2 teams. So you probably want whoever's in the East if you want to follow good Canadian hockey. And that's going to do us for today. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We really do appreciate all the support. Feel free to check us out on all the socials. Feel free to, obviously, if you're in the Australian NHL fans page, share it around. If you're not, consider joining the Australian NHL fans page if you're in Australia, especially. Also, if you find us around, if you want to throw us a couple of bucks, servers aren't cheap.
Cheap, yeah, not getting any
they're
cheaper.
definitely not cheap. Anyway, we will be back to preview a Stanley Cup final when we have these 4 down to 2. But we will catch you all later.
See you then.